reflect, but I really appreciated what you were saying about, you know, reconceptualizing what justice means and really being at the design of justice. And that's really something that I think I've been sitting with as someone who's been engaged in WPS and, where we've seen progress, but a lot of backlash, right? Is we're sitting often in this space of defending rather than moving things forward. And right. And so that's a space where, as well, I think that being put on the defensive is a space that I do think that has a way of undermining women's leadership and agency in deciding what is justice, because when you're defending, you're always on someone else's terms. And so, I think that's something that I've been reflecting on, and perhaps for me to think about how do we, as we face 25 years of WPS, I think there's a really interesting opportunity on the table, which is the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty that has been flagged, where I actually think that we have, we're closing an 80-year gap, and we have an opportunity to actually think about what does feminist engagement with a multilateral treaty process look like. And I'm really excited that Indai is here, because Indai was one of the folks whose shoulders we're building on based on the work that they did on the Rome Statute, as we really think about how to move forward. But what does it mean to meaningfully bring feminist experiences and voices to the conversation, and not just lawyers, because this is the kind of thing that's defining, there's legal definitions about what this means for future prospects for justice of gender-based harms and gender-based experiences. But it's also an important opportunity where, from the start, we can really think about what it means to center women's leadership in the conversation. And I was really grateful that Nargis spoke before, because I am associated with the End Gender Apartheid campaign, which has been an extraordinary effort that's been led by women from Afghanistan to really say that our experience is not currently recognized in the law, and we are being denied justice for our specific experience of gender-based harm because there's no legal framework to hold it accountable. And really, I think, as I think about this work, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about perhaps different prospects for broader feminist engagement, as well as what's happening on the End Gender Apartheid campaign. But it's really about a campaign that is driving through the direct experiences of women from an affected community to say this legal process needs to be responsive to our experience. And we are going to show up at the table to ask for what it is that we want. So I'll wrap up here and maybe bridge in a little bit more in other comments.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Akila. And you made my job easier, because you perfectly keyed up Indai to be able to come in and share her experience and extensive work in this space. So over to you, Indai. So sorry, Indai, you're muted. We're not able to hear you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ivy and Lily, for organizing this, and for the NGO CSW. Now, this is a very important topic, because we're looking at justice in the context of WPS. And, that's a passion that I think we should really look at with such intensity, and just building on from what Akila and Christine were saying. Now, let's just quickly think of the women victims and survivors of war and armed conflict, because that's the reason why we are talking about justice. As Narga stated, the women in Afghanistan and globally continue to suffer beyond measure. Let's assess when WPS agenda arrived in Afghanistan. It brought training workshop and action plans, but not reparations. Not the justice that the Afghan women had demanded with their own voices. WPS brought process and not transformation. Now, let's think quickly of the Yazidi women in Iraq, thousands enslaved by ISIS, their pain paraded before the world. Justice has come not from the United Nations, but from the courage of survivors themselves, like Nadia Murad standing alone against impunity. Then one more. Let's think of the women in Sudan and and South Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, women who endured war, not for a month or a year, but for decades. Peace agreements come and go, national action plans are drafted, donor reports are written, but the rapists and torturers walk free. Our question is now in this forum, where is women peace and security in ensuring justice for women victims and survivors in Afghanistan, in Bosnia, in Sudan, in Congo, etc., after 25 years? Now, dear colleagues, I must have to say we cannot continue to celebrate WPS as a success story while survivors wait for decade after decade for accountability. Now, I must say that we have to acknowledge that WPS has a fragmented legal framework. Now, I did a little bit of research, and these are the justice gaps in WPS. The WPS agenda, and I'm going to read this very quickly. The WPS agenda does not address historical injustices that predate its adoption, nor does it provide tools for truth-telling, reparation, or state accountability for past gender crimes. Survivors and their advocates have not been meaningfully integrated into WPS mechanism, despite their struggles informing the international jurisprudence on sexual violence and wartime gender-based crimes. WPS has no binding mechanism to compel government to acknowledge legal responsibility and provide reparations. WPS framework did not establish mechanism for reparation for survivors. Most victims have received no formal compensation. Now, to top it all, National Action Plan in post-war countries, and I have seen this personally, post-war countries focus on mainstreaming gender, not on survivor-centered justice when women were raped during the war. Now, the core flow of women, peace, and security is its soft, non-binding design. It relies on state goodwill rather than enforceable obligations. One of the clearest examples of this gap lies in the relationship between WPS and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. As you have stated, I was in Rome in 1998 pushing for rape, sexual slavery, for pregnancy as crime against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. And we won. We placed gender language into the statute of the ICC. But after Rome in 1998, when we started pushing for WPS in the United Nations, it was to ensure that the struggle for justice and peace is bound by legal systems that could hold states accountable. WPS was meant to transform the legal architecture to serve women survivors of war and armed conflict to achieve justice. For us to claim at this time, we need to again reclaim WPS, which means rewiring the architecture of WPS, linking it to binding law, which Akila very well explained, centering survivors, and transforming its relationship with state power. Reclaiming the power of WPS requires breaking these silos. Feminist movements are calling for WPS to be firmly linked to binding legal frameworks, to the Rome Statute, to CEDAW, and to transitional justice, and to the Future Crimes Against Humanity Treaty. WPS agenda must ensure that survivors and movements can demand and enforce their rights. Now, in conclusion, this means planting WPS in truth commissions, reparation programs, and legal processes. It means demanding explicit references to WPS obligation in national reporting to CEDAW and in the ICC cooperation framework. It means pushing feminist movements into treaty negotiations, such as the Emerging Crimes Against Humanity Treaty, so we can push for gender apartheid.
Thank
So
you so
in
much, Indai.
conclusion, I have to say we have a lot of work to do. Thank you.
We do, and I am so sorry to have to interrupt. It's I think if we could, we'll probably have like a day-long conference on on this issue and
Yeah.
speak in more detail, so that we can gain from everybody's experience. But perhaps we can go to Jill to hear from you, Jill.
Thank you. I'm going to take off on something that Nargis said and that Indai emphasized, which is that current approaches aren't working fast enough or broadly enough. Take that whatever direction you like, partly because of the lack of enforcement mechanism, partly because of entrenched misogyny and patriarchy, and also just the problem with expecting law to solve every human problem. Now, I'm not going to say that we shouldn't be relying on law because that is a way of pushing things forward and it can create cultural change. But also, cultural change can make it easier for law to change as well. So I think working on both of those things at once. I've been interested because of my current, I don't know, sadness about what's going on in the world. I've been thinking about things that don't require state recognition or state power, like mutual aid, restorative practices, transformative justice movements, which doesn't mean that we let states off the hook, but that we stop waiting for them to solve every problem, because they're clearly not going to, especially when it has to do with women. I think small capacity building combined with the coalition building that allows us to, this type of work where people from across the world are talking to each other is amazing, and I'm in awe of all of you that do it. I'm an academic. In some ways, what I do matters less. But also, doing things that people on the ground can do. Like, there are certain powers we have as human beings that no state could ever take from us. And that is our capacity to make the life of other people near us better every single day with the decisions we make. And so recognizing the people that can do that and giving them the power to do that while also working on these larger things, both short term and long term at the same time, I think is the way forward. And I'm just going to stop there. So in the interest of time.
Thank you so much, Jill. I think something that that Indai said and that you said about how the WPS agenda has given us process but not transformation. And then what you added about how, obviously the multilateral order is in peril and the structure of the state leaves much to be desired. And then allowing people to think about how they can react to the current global state, I think provides a sense of agency that sometimes maybe people feel like they're not able to have because the state has such an impact on individual lives. Perhaps we can stay with you and we can go in reverse order for the second question, which is what insights from your research on transitional justice and ethical loneliness can you share to shed light on where we stand today in ensuring more feminist informed leadership models? So of course you have worked specifically on ethical loneliness, which is a term that you created to describe this sense that people feel when they're further alienated and feel like humanity has abandoned them in the trauma that they have faced. But I also recognize that other panelists here with us have also worked on issues related to transitional justice. So however you have come at this work would be wonderful to hear from your experience. But we'll start with Jill and then we'll go in reverse order. So back to you, Jill.
All right, thank you. So I wrote a book called Ethical Loneliness, which is a name that I give to a double abandonment. The first abandonment is when people are subjected to mass violence or longstanding oppression. That's what we focus on when we talk about crimes against humanity and war crimes. The second abandonment is when those who were harmed try to testify to what happened and then aren't properly heard. So you can see that the first abandonment is the fault of people doing unjust things to people. But the second abandonment might be the fault of people actually trying to help. People working in courts and truth commissions and international committees and healthcare organizations who may think they're listening but are failing to hear. There are many understandable reasons why someone might fail to hear well. Various forms of training might make us focus on a limited range of ideas, as when a lawyer focuses on the facts of the case, but not the larger harm that those facts represent. Trauma or fear might make it difficult for us to hear what's truly being said, as when an interviewer leads a survivor to tell a story of resilience rather than one of destruction. Procedures or beliefs might dictate that some words belong and others don't. You could think of a conversation between a patient and a doctor, or what is allowed to be said in a committee meeting. Cultural frames might make it hard to perceive something that originates from outside that frame, because translation is always fraught, even when you share a language. And then institutional goals might dictate what words mean, or even what sounds may be heard in a specific setting. So all of this to say that none of us will ever be perfect at hearing, because we all have our beliefs and our assumptions that ground us. But when we know that we might be part of the problem, we can teach ourselves to listen to our own failures of hearing. And one way to begin to do that is that when you don't understand why someone else is saying what they're saying, don't immediately think that they have to do a better job with their words. Perhaps ask yourself what it is about your way of hearing that makes understanding what matters to someone else difficult to hear. And I want to say that I'm doing this absolutely without asking you to place blame on yourself. Blame is not helpful here. Hopefully, we are feminists in this together to do the work well, and we can admit that we're never perfect, even when we're always trying to be better. And again, in the interest of time, I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Jill. Yeah, it sounds, I think it requires a lot of inner work as we're trying to hear others as well, and maybe sometimes also listening to our own selves too. Thank you for sharing your research with us. Over to you, Indai.
I think well, thank you, Jill, for really stating it there. I think our challenge, and I will be very quick because I did take a little bit of time when I was speaking earlier. Our challenge is how to take this energy into our in our terms. I mean, like, okay, we're talking of justice. We have met with the women victims and survivors. But where is justice? You know, how do, as Jill was saying, we're not really embracing the law, but the law is there. So our challenge now is how can we do transitional justice on a feminist framework? How can we influence the Crime Against Humanity Treaty to push for gender apartheid, you know, within the framework of the testimonies of the women survivors of war? So which means we need to transform our personal testimonies to be codified as a crime in the opportunities and like the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty, which is coming, you know. So there are areas that we can, you know, insert to, but I think the most important thing is let's look at transitional justice, because the impact, the emotional impact that women were heard and there was a justice mechanism using international law would have a long-term impact into their lives, which, by the way, the government will never do. So we have to take that within our own terms.
Thank you so much, Indai. Over to you, Akila.
Thank you. And I think really thank you to Jill and to Indai for sitting the stage here. You know, I think the thing that I'm sitting with as I think about the work that I do and what I frequently see happens is really that we sit in a space with a lot of lip service towards survivor-centric approaches, survivor-led approaches, right? And then what we see at the end of the day is that the competition of funding, perceptions of leadership get in the way of actually staying committed to the values that and that's why we end up paying lip service rather than actually finding ways to center it. And, you know, Jill, I saw your comment about, you know, speaking quickly, right? And some of that, there's so much of that that goes into our perceptions of whose voice is heard and who's at the table, right? These games we play of, okay, we need somebody who's going to be palatable to this group, who speaks English well, because language is, of course, something that is used as an immense barrier to conversation, participation, and leadership, right? So then we start playing into these ideas that then affect what it is that we do at the core. And so for me, I sit with this dichotomy of how do we engage in these spaces? How do we meaningfully redesign our own goals for multilateral processes, not just to be set by the rules that are being provided for us, but how do we, as feminist advocates, set our own objectives and goals that fuel what we are looking for with what we can, with what we can accomplish out of a multilateral engagement, a formal justice process as one goal, but actually set ourselves in a framework for success that's defined by what we are looking for. And that means the terms of whose voice is valuable, whose leadership is valuable, how we create space to actually accommodate for some of these differences. One of the things that I think that we do really badly in this space is we use deadlines and efficiency and speed as ways to then actually shortcut what some of these complex conversations look like, right? Sometimes when you're talking to affected communities, you can't just say, well, we need you to submit something or review something by X date, but we actually need to rethink our own processes and our own systems. And so I think for me, as I think about what does compassionate leadership look like, how do we think about, the ideas of who we're hearing and what are these voices, I think we need to really carefully dissect the assumptions that kind of drive the way that our sector operates in this arena and really think about how do we actually flip the table on some of these conversations.
Thank you so much, Akilah. I'm really appreciating how all the comments that are being made are interconnected and the way that you're all building off of each other. I really appreciate it. Just before I hand the floor over to Kristen, I'm wondering if my colleagues can assist me, if we can bring Nargis back. I don't know if she'll be able to. So when we do the final question, we're also able to hear from Nargis. And I think because these are really difficult issues that we're dealing with, just trying to remember what keeps us hopeful and what helps us to continue to do our work is really important. So that'll be the last question last prompt that will be asked. So thank you so much. It's wonderful to see you with us, Nagi. So over to you, Kristen, before we go to the last question. Hopefully we'll hear from the audience as well on that one. So the floor is yours, Kristen.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. And again, building on what everyone has said, I'm taking notes fast and furiously. I really was just thinking about the survivor-led and voice and these kinds of things because it's so central to the work that we've been doing, the practice work. I again responded to this and I'll be reading it, but there's so much I wanted to say also in response to that too. So just thank you all so much. I'm going to begin by saying that my work doesn't specifically focus on transitional justice in the legal sense or ethical loneliness. So again, I'm going to ground this answer in my feminist ethnographic research interventions. And through this work, my colleagues and I at Footage, we see almost daily the real conditions that justice systems try to respond to. Through participatory storytelling, we also see what it means to live after harm when recovery depends on relationships, on connection, and on care. And in our work with forcibly displaced communities, women often share stories and again with institutions and with researchers, and yet the systems rarely change around them. And of course, that silence after the telling becomes its own kind of harm, we know. And often this harm turns inward as shame, and shame is something we talk about a lot in our work. Shame is deeply, deeply harmful. It isolates, it separates people. And at Footage, we nurture compassion, including self-compassion, to rebuild connection and reduce shame. Compassion helps people to feel part of life again. And so I just want to make 2 points leading to leadership on this. And the first is, in our work, we follow a simple rule, and that is no research for research's sake. And what that means is that every question we ask has to lead towards transformation. And otherwise, we risk repeating the harms that we're seeking to heal. And we do this using feminist research methods. In fact, no research for research's sake is at the core of feminist inquiry. We know this, it's transformative. So we have a lot to learn from feminist methods about leadership, I truly believe. So what makes them feminist? It's not only who participates, but the questions we ask. Is this going to deepen connection? Will this work move us forward? These questions can guide how we learn and how we lead. So feminist informed leadership for us is compassionate leadership, empathy in action, grounded in care, reciprocity, and in shared authorship. We see systems fail survivors of gender-based violence all the time. All of us do. And when this happens, we know that people create new systems of care, sometimes in miniature. But we see this in our interventions where women are organizing, listening, rebuilding trust, where institutions are not around anymore. And feminist and compassionate leadership grows in these spaces among people who lead through relationship, not through position, not through hierarchy. And I just wanted to name 3 practices that stand out sometimes in these spaces. And this could include storytelling as collective witnessing, participation as co-design, and service and reciprocity as acts of care that hold us together. And so through these practices, and I'll close with this, that I would argue that not only does shame begin to loosen its power, and shame can literally bring down nation states. Shame it's the lowest vibrating frequency on the scales of human consciousness. It is so detrimental. But so we know that some of these practices can help to alleviate shame, and they can also help for leadership to take a different form. And in our work where people share experience, they share their stories so that no one feels alone, and they do so with compassion for self and for other. And this becomes both an act of healing and a way of leading. So feminist and compassionate leadership then is not a theory or an ideal. It's a daily practice that's going to continue to keep humanity at the center, and including at the center of this WPS agenda, making it real.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I think that prepares us very well when you talk about daily practice. I think many of us are practicing daily, keeping the hope alive that despite the current geopolitical situation of the world, that the work that we're doing is still worth doing. And there has to be a reason why we continue every day. So it would be wonderful to hear from you. Perhaps we can pass it over to Nargis to hear, in light of the upcoming Commission on the Status of Women, which will focus on access to justice, and the review theme is going to be on women in decision-making. What gives you hope as we prepare for the CSW? Perhaps we can hear from you, Nargis, and if we have anybody from the audience, we'll pass it over to them. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Lily. I'm listening to the great speakers at this panel. There are a couple of notes that I was just taking while listening to the discussion, and I would like to highlight that. One is that I was in a conference in Kenya, and I came back yesterday, and there was one discussion that you're talking, and I said sometimes I feel that we have turned into human rights robots rather than human beings, because that compassion is totally gone. We're just, as Akila mentioned, we are just focused on the deadlines, reports, and what is next. We have totally forgot that there is that compassion part of it that is totally missing. So I think investing on that part is so important. Second thing that I would like to mention is about the trauma. While the discussion that we have here is about survival of gender-based violence, that is which is important and we have to focus on. But there are also women leaders that they are traumatized. They have gone through a lot of ups and downs themselves. And as a human being, they also need support. In case of us, we lost our country and we lost our identity. And suddenly over the night, we turned from leaders into liabilities that even our families were thinking what to do with us, because we turned into liabilities. Anybody would have kept us, they would have been targeted because of us. So with all that trauma that we have gone through, still we have to focus on building resilience of those that are inside Afghanistan, raising awareness internationally about the situation in Afghanistan, and continuously take different initiatives demanding for justice and accountability. But we have totally forgot the part that what happened to all of us, that we are working day and night at the personal level. So I think that is really important, and I still hope that we'll be able to receive some sort of support, that we have that like human level recovery for among ourselves, to at least sit amongst ourselves, and rather than focusing on like planning, advocacy, or anything, and just ask each other that what happened to us, what we have gone through, how we felt about the situation, how we feel about the situation now, and like how's that impacted us. So I think those kind of spaces are really important, because yes, it's important that we focus on the survivors, but the women human rights defenders and the leaders that they're working at the front line, if we don't provide that kind of space for them, they're going to burn out. For example, one thing that we have seen in case of us in Afghanistan is that we have become highly traumatized, and in many ways we continuously criticize each other, and that is, I can see, preventing us from coming together to have more forceful and collective advocacy, because we still focus on like small grudges and grievances that we have, because we never had that space and opportunity to be able to heal from that. So I think for greater impact, it's also important for us that we heal ourselves, we recover from the trauma that we are going at the personal or as a group level, to be able to build up upon that. So I highly recommend that we focus on that. And the last point that I would like to make moving forward is that, I mean, being at this, if there was no hope, I wouldn't have participated in this webinar, and I wouldn't have talked here. If there was no hope, I wouldn't have gone all the way from Toronto to Kenya to actually meet more women peace builders and discuss what we can do with them. So there is hope. I think the women themselves are the source of hope and inspiration for us. For me, myself, the young women in Afghanistan, the way that they resist, the way that they work, the way that they take all the risks, life-threatening risks, to be able to continue. I'm like, who am I not continuing in this safe space when they continue? But I'm also deeply and profoundly concerned about the impact that we're making. I really hope that we'll be able to take at least one or two different actions and try to see how we can do things more differently. For me, creation of pressure is really important, because on one hand, we talk about compassion leadership, which is so important, care about each other. But on the other hand, the oppressors do not care about any of these things. They're just coming with the most regressive policy, constantly taking all the spaces from us. So for us, we're at the defense level, but it's important that we rise above this and try to strategize to be able to move forward. And I hope that the upcoming CSW will be space for us where we can arrange some small to bigger level of discussions where we can talk about this. We can find some alliances among the state members, and as well as you find some global leaders that they will stand with us and will help us to actually rise above this and try to take some initiatives which will be bold and will be courageous and will bring all of us together and give us that energy and do the boost that we require to do things differently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nargis. I think particularly for, outlining some of the hurdles that we also see in the larger feminist movement, of the things that keep us apart. And I think often that we sometimes get in our own ways in trying to build a movement that is strong and that is resilient. And I think that's something that we see across different spaces, but for also providing concrete examples of how we can work together in a more strategic way. So I'm just trying to see if we have hands online for those who would like to come in to share what they're looking forward to, or how they're maintaining hope as they prepare for the upcoming CSW. If we don't have hands online, I can come back to the next panelist before we move forward. So I don't know if we, I see we have some hands. So I see Shaila's hand. And I just would like to remind everybody if we can just be brief so we can allow more and more people to participate. So over to you, Shaila.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lily, and thank you for an outstanding panel. I'll get straight to the point. I am CEO and founder of STEM Institute, work largely in male-dominated environment. The question I have for all of us, and something that I focus on very much, is how we talked about allyship, we talked about transformational actions and so on. What are your recommendations on how we train women leaders, women like ourselves, to deal with that kind of misogyny, whether it's at meetings, whether it's embedded in organizational planning, decision-making, and so on? Because it seems to me a lot of energy needs to go in there to train future leaders. So I'd love to hear from all of you in your walks of life and what your experience has been. Whatever responses can come out, I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shala. Perhaps maybe I'll take one or two more from the audience, actually, if that's okay, and then we'll come back to the panelist. So over to you, Anna.
Yes. Thank you. My mind kept going through everybody's presentation related to our very disturbing experience at the beginning of this Zoom call. I don't think we can just say we've got to block the hacker. 119 women were victims of sexual violence this morning as we tried to have a meeting. I, for one, am still shaking, okay? I don't believe reporting a hacker is the only thing we can do. There has to be a format. I don't know if that was an AI-generated image. I was hoping that Shayla was on the phone call because I know she's far more skilled in technology than I am. But if there does not exist a format to report this type of sexual violence and victimization of women and trauma-inducing experiences, then we need to create one on a global level. If that was an AI-generated image, then, you know, we're limited, but there are ways now that we need to identify if that was a person that we witnessed, and then how do we report them on a global level? And it is our obligation because we need to protect other women from what we experienced this morning.
Thank you so much, Anna, for bringing that up. And I'm sure the executive committee of NGO CSW can consult on this to see how we can appropriately respond. So we'll take one more comment from Mary Rose, and then I'll return to the panel and hear from you. I think we'll have like about 5 minutes left. So sorry for the time. Over to you, Mary Rose.
Yeah, thank you for this wonderful opportunity, and all of you on the front line, because we're all on the front lines. The feminist movement has changed. And I remember back in the day when I first came into the next wave of the feminist movement, we had circles and we had discussions. And what we now have are nonprofits that have a hierarchy and different processes. And I'm wondering how we can reestablish something where we bring circles of discussion back together, because we're so focused on agendas and making sure certain things happen, we're not taking care of our emotional selves. I do a lot of work on a lot of us are trying to put positive statements on Facebook, and we're getting backlash. You can't imagine what other women as well as men are saying to us through these screens. And my second thing is, you know, I'm first generation American. I come from a family who experienced war, and I'm wondering how we can bring in men who are just really wanting to help us. And I've been working with some within the state level, trying to change some things in communities. But that's about all I wanted to say. But thank you for all being here. But, you know, we're all living, a lot of our families are living with trauma. I grew up with family members who experienced that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary Rose. So I will bring it back to the panel. You have a number of things to respond to if you like. The questions that came from the audience on training, if anybody has had experience with reporting on these things that have happened in meetings, and then another on including men in these conversations, but also taking care so that we're able to continue the work. And of course, whatever comments you're able to share about how you keep doing the work would be good. So over to you, Jill.
So I think I can bring together the training question with Mary Rose's point about how feminism back in the day was about circles. I mean, there's good things about the way feminism has changed, because feminism back in the day was very white, and now it is not, and that also brings in complexities of being able to discuss things with each other. Nonetheless, what I was going to say about training for anyone who's going to be a woman in a male-dominated setting, which is, let's just face it, most of us, you know, building things like circle practices, coalition, friendship, feminist support circles, so that you have people that you can rely on to have your back. Even if they don't have your back in the meeting where someone speaks to you abusively, there's someone you can talk to later to point out to you, no, you were right. You keep going. So that you don't start to feel like you're a crazy person. These types of things. And, I'm an academic philosopher, so I know what it's like to be in a room full of men who think they know more than me. These things have really saved me over the years. And that's just a beginning of things that we might think about in terms of building into training, something that goes beyond what the qualifications of the job are, but like, how do you make for yourself a community that transcends your job?
Thank you so much, Joe. I think it's really important when we hear how, like, the coping mechanisms that we all use, and to share. And sometimes it's also just helpful to know that others are going through the same. I think sometimes women have this tendency we're just like, we face whatever difficulties are ahead, and we don't always share because we don't want to indulge in thinking about the very painful experiences that are out there. But I think actually this has some kind of therapeutic effect actually when we share that with each other. So thank you for sharing that. The floor is open. I don't know if any other panelists would like to come in.
I might quickly jump in just with one, it's a little bit more meta, but I think what I was, when I listened to this, okay, we have training and we have this, I think something else that has to happen in parallel is the reconstruction, empowerment, and uplifting of various types of leadership. So if we're talking about, uplifting forms of compassionate leadership, feminist leadership, these kinds of things. So this would be a change at the root, right? This would be a lot more of a radical change. If we start to prioritize, again, uplift, validate these forms of leadership, then, the misogyny and the things that we're talking about will hopefully start to be repelled out of those. It will look very, very different. It would be a different paradigm. And so if we can start to, in parallel, be really working at how do we validate's not the right word, but I think you all know what I'm talking about. How do we uplift these forms and construct these forms and get these forms out into common discourse? Then this will be one way that we can move forward, again, in line with what Jill was saying, in parallel with what Jill was saying.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Indai, was that a hand?
Yeah,
Please.
just quickly, because I think, this is a very important point about leadership. I mean, women, we are basically all leaders, in our own right. I think women can multitask and run anything. So by nature, women are really leaders in their own rights and in their own capacity. But what we need to deconstruct here is we are trying to put ourselves into a patriarchal table. Let us just examine that all these governmental structures are led by men, and we know they're let's call them patriarchal table, and we're trying to put ourselves there without knowing, putting women as Secretary General of the United Nations. Those are patriarchal tables that we are approaching. But what we are not looking at is we need to examine the very political structure of that leadership that is led by men that we want to be a part of. We need to have a social, political analysis of those leadership that we women needs to be a part of because we feel we're excluded. So we're always saying that, we need to be part of that leadership. We need to be there without examining deeply that the very structure that we want to be part of, we know that we might end up as a flower vase in those structure. How many peace process we have put women there and end up as a flower vase because they had no voices? But they will always say, the tickbacks, that there were women in the peace process. So we need to really examine very deeply which are the structures we want to. But if we think the importance of our presence there is necessary, then let's examine deeply how we can break that wall and be part of that process. So two things: examine the structure that we want to be part of that leadership. Secondly, have our own, confidence that all women have leadership, because we are, as mothers, as sisters, everything, we run the show most of the time and are not acknowledged. And then thirdly, to break that patriarchal table, we have to be very, very clear on our agenda, not because we need a woman there, but because we have an agenda to bring forward.
Thank you so much. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about how as we move around the world, there are processes that are contributing to the disintegration of the world as we know it. But there are also processes that are contributing to integrative processes. And I think hopefully, as we are working together, we have more and more who will contribute to the integrative process and fewer who are contribute to the disintegration of our global community. Last but not least, I don't know, Akila, if you want to share some thoughts before we hand it back to the co-chairs.
Maybe I'll just wrap up building on what others have said, and then maybe going back to the thing of what gives me hope as well. And some of the questions around how has the feminist movement changed? Well, one thing that gives me hope is actually the connection I made with Indai, and where we've actually made a connection over how we carry forward this legacy of what the Women's Caucus did and how we learn from their ways of organizing informally and formally, their ways of advocacy, and how we have an intergenerational conversation about what that looks like now as the moment has changed, right? The moment for feminist advocacy is different now than it was in 1998 and 1996. And not necessarily in a better way, but also the movement has changed. Jill pointed out it's less white than it used to be. And so how do we actually draw out some of the strengths of where we're at now? How do we learn? How do we connect? And how do we actually take these strengths and continue to build forward? And for me, there's a lot of excitement and hope in how it is that we come together to do that towards concrete goals like the treaty, but also towards everything else that I think that all of us are working on and doing. So for me, that's a space of hope and optimism that I'm sitting in, but also just learning and trying to think about how we all collectively continue to learn and improve how we do our work.
Thank you so much, Akila, for closing us out. And with that, and with gratitude to all of you panelists for joining us, for sharing with us your expertise and also your experience in this work, I will hand it back to our co-chairs to continue with the rest of the meeting. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Lily and Ivy, for that wonderful panel, excellent panel. And thank you, panelists, contributors. That was marvelous. That was an excellent panel. Thank you so much. We are going to continue with our updates. And if we can bring on Vivek Ray with UN Women, we're going to hear some updates from UN Women. And we're going to review some of the information that we gave, either in the chat, allowing for time, or in person. So we had Vivek Ray on. Let's see, can we bring him on? Well, we're trying to get him
having trouble connecting.
Spotlighted.
He's having trouble connecting. He has bad connectivity.
Right. I read that. I've asked to see if he could come back. But while we're waiting for that, I just want to give a quick review of the events and the dates that we mentioned earlier. Very important is the meeting tomorrow that Pamela mentioned, the information session on shifting paradigms, united to a review of the Secretary General's UN 80 report, United to Deliver. It's tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if we can put the registration in the chat, We also have the application opening for the parallel events, November 10th for members of NGO CSW. And if we can put in the chat, if you want to become members, you can go to our website and how to engage, and a drop-down menu, you go, and that's how you learn how you can become a member. If you're a member already, the applications will open on November 10th for members and November 13th for the general public. That information will be on our website, ngocsw.org. And we also have the open forum on Wednesday, November 12th. That's a review of the NGO forum, including the parallel events. And then we also invite you to join us next month for our monthly meeting on Tuesday, November 18th, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, New York time. So, were we able to reconnect Vivek?
No, he's not able to get past the registration page, but I just want to address 2 questions that were in the chat. Someone wanted clarity on what did we mean by the parallel events, and they are parallel events for the NGO CSW 70 forum that's going to take place in March during the Commission on the Status of Women. So the applications for the forum, the parallel events, are opening then. And then someone wanted clarity on what is a member. And members of NGO CSW are individuals and organizations that go onto the website and make a formal declaration that they want to become a member. They want to join us in this work. And we have several categories. You can join as an ECOSOC accredited member, and that's a regular full member, or for organizations that are not ECOSOC accredited, they can be supporting members. And then we have individual members as well as youth members. So there's a $60 fee for regular members. Those are organizational, ECOSOC accredited. And the fees decrease from there. And for youth members, it's $25. And don't forget, we are reigniting the YLYP, and we need as many youth members as possible because we want to do great things. So Vivek is not able to join, and he is going to send something in writing that we will be able to share in the next newsletter. But I think, Rosa, we can move on to our slogan. Because,
Okay.
Yeah, so you want to start?
Our slogan, which I'm putting in the chat, this is for all of us. So please, yes, let's see everyone open up your cameras. We're going to be closing with this slogan for everyone to take inspiration and leave this meeting not feeling shaky, or, empower yourselves with our presence. And so our slogan that we're in these meetings, and actually we want to start, is with our slogan. I'll say, what do we want? What do we need? And you can say equality, peace, justice now. Okay. And so open up your microphones as well, so you can let it out and join us in this. So
we do it 3 times.
3 times. What do we want?
Equality.
Equality.
Justice.
Justice now.
We need
Equality.
peace.
Justice.
Now.
What are we gonna have? Peace.
Now.
Want it now. Hey, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Great program. Thank you.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good to see everyone. Bye-bye.